Good evening, everybody, and welcome to our YFC AGRI Forum, Ready for Change. I'm Tom Pope, your current YFC AGRI Chairman and former Somerset YFC County Chairman. I'm a Reading graduate, agronomist and mixed arable and poultry farmer. And it's my great pleasure to chair the discussion this evening and help everybody voice their opinions about forthcoming change, the pace of change and the effect it's having on all of us, both professionally and personally. And who better to join our panel of guests but Janet Hughes, Programme Director for Defra's Future Farming and Countryside Programme, the team that's responsible for transforming the way that Defra supports and regulates farming and the countryside in England in what people have described as the biggest change in farming policy for a generation. Janet's joined by her colleague Sarah Everard tonight, who will help Janet answer some questions about the new entrant scheme, farm productivity and innovation as well. We're also joined by Farmers Weekly editor Andrew Meredith, who will be known to many of you through his former YFC involvement and also his current editorialship capacity. And finally, we have NatWest's Director of Agriculture, Roddy McLean, who will no doubt give us all an overview of the bank's thinking about future support. And then finally, we have our YFC Agri Vice Chairwoman and business consultant from Nottinghamshire, Sammy Allen, who also plays an active role on her family's mixed pig and sheep and arable farm. So welcome everybody, and just a couple of points just before we start. In a moment, I'm going to ask the panel to briefly introduce themselves and talk for a few minutes about their perception of the current change and the far-reaching effects that it may or may not have on the rural community and farming as a whole. During the discussion, we'll be running an online poll at one point so we can get some audience participation and some feedback. And finally, most importantly, this is an interactive debate. So please use the chat facility to ask any questions to the panel. Janet specifically asked for people not to hold back from asking pointy questions and to ask what you want to know. So feel free to ask away and I'll try and direct them to the right area of the panel. So it's been a roller coaster in so many ways over the past couple of years, and so good to see some activities happening again in person. But I hope this continued online event gives more and more people across the country, wherever you are, to join us this evening. And now on to our first guest, Janet Hughes. I mentioned that Janet, you're the Defra's Future Farming and Countryside Programme Director. So over to you for your perception of current change and the far-reaching effects on the rural and farming community that it may have. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Tom. Thank you so much, Sammy and Tom, for having me and Sarah along this evening. We're delighted to be here and looking forward to the discussion. As Tom said, I'm the director of the Future Farming Programme in Defra. And I'm just going to say a few words about what that includes so you know what you can ask us pointy questions about. You can ask us anything you like, but I'm better at answering questions about things I'm responsible for than I am about things I'm not. What we're doing in our programme is we're responsible for everything that's involved in moving away from the Common Agricultural Policy and all of the schemes and subsidies that involves and onto a whole new set of arrangements for England. And that new set of arrangements for England includes phasing out basic payments, as I'm sure you know, over the next 7 years, and using that money instead to invest in better outcomes for the environment, climate, and animal health and welfare, alongside food production in agriculture. And the way we're going to do that investment is through new environmental land management schemes, where we'll pay farmers and land managers to produce public goods on their land. And public goods are things which the public really want to see, but which they don't pay for in the shop. So things like better biodiversity, better water quality, better air quality, climate change mitigation and carbon storage. So we'll pay for those through 3 different environmental land management schemes. One which is at farm level for any farmer to do, self-service, really easy to sign up, do these things. at local level, so things which are particular to a local area. So if you're in a catchment, maybe nitrate runoff might be a priority in that particular area. And at landscape level for really long-term, large-scale land use change and habitat restoration. And we're working on all those 3 schemes now, and we're going to roll them all out, and they'll all be fully live from 2024, but we're actually starting to roll them out right now. And we've got 938 farmers taking part in a pilot right now of one of those schemes they've just signed up. And whilst we're rolling those out, the existing schemes will carry on. And so we've got countryside stewardship that you might have heard of, where we're getting more and more farmers into that scheme. We had twice as many applications this year as we had 3 years ago, 30% up from last year even. So we're getting more and more people into those schemes in the meantime while we build the new ones. So that's the environment schemes. And then the rest of the money we're going to invest in productivity in the sector, because we believe that you can't have an environmentally sustainable sector unless it's profitable. And you can't in the long term have a profitable sector and a productive sector unless it's environmentally sustainable. So you've got to take care of the natural capital that we use to produce our food. So to support productivity, we've got a range of different things we're doing to help farmers to innovate on their farm, to adopt innovative practices, and to invest in the sort of technology and practices that you need in order to be efficient and also climate and environment friendly. And then the last set of things we're doing is to try to move from a situation where the way we regulate farming in the countryside is seen as unfair and not very effective, where we come down hard on people who've done something wrong that doesn't really matter, and we don't do anything about people who are doing something wrong that really does matter. We're going to flip that round and instead help people to comply with the rules where they actually are trying to do that, which is the vast majority of people, and make sure we don't damage the countryside through farming, and properly enforce the rules where there are people who are willfully breaking the rules. So taking all those things together, the environment schemes, the productivity support, and the regulation and enforcement, what we're trying to achieve is a sector that is really competitive and really productive and profitable for individual businesses, along with environment, climate, and animal health and welfare, sustainability. And we think that those things go together hand in hand. And what that means, what will that look like in 10 years' time, say? What that will look like is it will be normal in farming to think about production in a much broader sense than we do now. So instead of just thinking, I am producing food, possibly even just one type of food, but certainly just food on my farm, it will be normal to think, I've got a business here. And as part of that business, I produce environmental goods, I produce climate goods, I produce food goods, and maybe several other types of goods as well from the same resource. And that will become normal. We'll still have a really diverse sector because it's really diverse now, and that's one of the wonderful things about it. But it will be normal for farmers to possibly look a little bit more messy and make a bit more space for nature and have a bit more wildlife on them. And it'll be much rarer to see bare grounds because people will be constantly trying to get the best out of their land and regenerating it at the same time. And that's what the sector will look like, I think, in 10 years' time. But I think we're going to get into the discussion a bit more about what we think it will look like, and I'm delighted to answer your questions about it. So those are the things I'm responsible for. Sarah, who's here with me, do you want to say a quick word about what you're responsible for, Sarah, and what you can answer questions about?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Sarah Everett. I work in Janet's team, and I'm responsible for the farming productivity and innovation schemes, which Janet has already touched on. Specifically, there are 4 of those. There is the Farming Investment Fund, which is there to provide grants to farmers, growers, contractors and foresters to invest in equipment, technology and infrastructure. There's the Farming Innovation Programme, which is there to support farmers invest in R&D and innovation. And hopefully some of you might have seen we've just launched the applications for the first 3 competitions under the Farming Innovation Programme that opened last week. And so we're really excited to see the types of projects that come forward that can help improve productivity and the environment as well. There's also the Resilience Fund, which again, we have 19 delivery partners out there providing business advice and support for those that are losing their agricultural subsidies. And then finally, and I'm sure that we'll get into more discussion on this during the session tonight, are our plans around creating a new entrant scheme. We've talked to some of you before about this, but we're in this sort of design phase of working out what that scheme should look like. But it would be really great to have a further discussion and ask lots of questions and get your views on how we can make the new entrance scheme work. That's me.
So that's us, and I'm going to put a few links in the chat to things that you might want to have a look at while we're talking that will tell you a bit more about what we're doing and how you can get involved and follow us and keep updated. So I'll do that too. Thanks, Tom.
Thank you very much, Janet and Sarah. And now over to Farmers Weekly editor Andrew Meredith.
Thank you, Tom. Good evening, everyone. I'm going to keep this quick. I know that those of you who are here to find out some more information about what the future holds, be more interested in hearing from Defra, I'm sure, this evening. But where does Farmers Weekly fit into the blizzard of all the information that is coming your way? Of course, we are that pipeline of content coming to you every Friday when you read the magazine, every day on the website, every week too with the podcast. We want to help break down the jargon, we want to cut through the noise, and we want to distill exactly what it means for you as much as possible at farm level. We can't obviously give you advice on an individual basis, although we'd love to, but we try and serve every corner of the UK and keep you updated as week by week, month by month, more and more information about those schemes that Janet referred to come out. And of course, we see it as our role to speak up on your behalf and hold Defra to account and the other governments too, as they develop their new environmental plans and do all the other things that interact with the farming that happens at a farm gate level. And of course, other governments really important, even more important perhaps than they were before Brexit, because of course, devolution means that some of these farming schemes in different countries may well look very different in a few years. And that's something that I find very interesting. What will it mean to be a farmer in Scotland versus a farmer in England, Wales or Northern Ireland? We've had it. Some variation already, of course, in Scotland. They have, a bit more support, for example, for the suckler cow scheme. But, are two similar farms in different areas of the country in 5 or 10 years' time, is one going to be profitable and the other isn't? I find that very interesting. How are we doing it in addition to all our regular content? Well, this Friday's magazine is really special. It's the second edition of our transition supplement. That's our biggest project that we've launched this year in collaboration with many, many companies across the farming industry to just take a longer look and a more detailed look at some of how all these issues intersect. With all this talk, of course, with COP26 about the road to net zero. What does that mean for farming? How does that interact with all the farming schemes that are coming your way? How does that interact with the future for carbon? Are you going to be able to make some money out of that? What are all these big ideas actually meaning at a farm level? Are we going to be able to do something with them, or is it all just hot air? Well, if you're not a subscriber, but you buy the magazine from time to time, do buy it this Friday. Just finished that edition today. And it's going to be a detailed look at the road to net zero and what that means for agriculture. And when we think about how to break it down for farmers, what I'm very interested in and what my team are very interested in is where is that alignment between improving the margin for your business? How can you do that and benefit the environment at the same time? We've got some great stories about dairy farmers this year in this edition who, they're cooperating more, they're sharing machinery, they're getting more efficient machines to do the job, they're cutting their fuel use. That's really great, particularly at the moment. We've seen the red diesel price double since this time last year, and I know that will be having a big, big impact on a lot of you guys. So it's just thinking about all of those things and just doing our bit to keep you informed. So that's what worries me on a week-by-week basis. So if you have any feedback for me this evening, I'd really like to hear about whether you think you're well served by the media and what we can do in addition to educate and entertain you, because that's what a good magazine has to be as well. It has to be a pleasure to read. So I look forward to hearing your comments on that if you have time for any. Thanks very much, Tom.
Thank you, Andrew. And can we now hear from Roddy McLean, NatWest's Director of Agriculture? Thank you, Roddy.
Thank you, Tom. Good evening, all. As Tom says, I'm Director of Agriculture for NatWest. I don't class myself as a banker. My background's in technical and financial ag business consultancy with a bit of hands-on time managing farms in my my distant past. I still like to think I get out there and help my son on the coalface. But from the conversations I hear with his mother, I think he's showing great forbearance of me. And I suppose hindrance rather than help might be an adjective that he would use of me, but not to my face. Just as the sector, I can't remember when we've had to face so much challenge or change, not just in the sector, but in our lives in general. We've got Brexit, we've got COVID-19, people working from home, nitrogen prices where they are. I've never seen them in the years I've been involved in the sector, and that's more than I care to mention. And we've got the added challenge of climate in next year. Change is a constant. It's always been here. The thing that I think has changed is the pace. I'd suggest that it's never been as fast as it is now, nor do I suspect it will ever be this slow again. And change isn't bad. It brings opportunity. And I think overarching everything, we need to remember that the global and UK population is growing. And it's forecast to grow at a rate of about 150 to 200 mouths a day to the end of the century. And that gives us great hope and future for the sector. And building on that, I think as we move forward, the ethics of where food comes from will be increasingly important. And people will be concerned about labour and environmental exploitation. And that brings home production back to the fore, in my opinion. But we've got a challenge just now. We've got the net zero and holding temperatures to 1.5 degree increase. But the wider sustainability piece will come to the fore very soon if it hasn't already registered with folk. I've seen some work that shows that on current demand, what we as the global population demand of this earth to supply really needs 1.6 globes to sustainably do that. We've got to find a better way of doing things and how we live. And if you're like a US citizen, if we're all US citizens, it wouldn't be 1.6 globes, it would be 5. Unfortunately, the same research shows that we in the UK were not whiter than white. We actually take up 2.6 if we converted the rest of the world to how we live. And I think we shouldn't be shackled by the actions of the past. And this is something that we have tended to do and have done to us. And if I think about how agricultural support over the last 40 years has gone, it's very much had an eye to the past to keep some stability there. I think we should be cognizant of the past, and our forebearers were more in tune with sustainability, possibly without realising, than we have become for a variety of reasons that at the time were thought to be proper. I think we can learn from our forebearers, but we can adapt and improve on what they did using the power of the science and technology that we now have to deliver for society as a whole, and more importantly, to ensure that my grandkids and my great-grandkids and your kids and grandkids have a good future. Because if we don't get this right, it's not the planet we're going to kill, it's us that we're going to make extinct. But having said that, I'm excited for what the future holds, and I think you guys should be. It will be different. Is that bad? I would suggest strongly, probably not. And the other thing, we as NatWest remain supportive of and to the sector, and will work with them to get through this and move forward through the rest of this century. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you very much, Roddy. Really interesting points there. And now finally, over to Sammy Allen, who's known to most of you, and like I said, business consultant and farmer, and YFC Agri Vice Chairwoman. So over to you, Sammy. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. Yeah, hi everyone. As Tom said, I'm a farm business consultant by day, help out on the farm at home by night and weekend. And in terms of change and everything else that I think has been touched on, I think I'd like to just retouch on the price increases in everything. Not only are we still seeing increases in wheat price, which is great, but as Roddy said, we've also got fertilizer prices going through the roof. Is this going to be the new normal, or is it going to be even higher? Is it going to go back to what we have seen as normal? And then also in terms of net zero and carbon, are we going to be going down the pub in 5 years' time and sort of comparing carbon yield and how much people are getting for selling carbon, buying carbon, etc.? Is that going to be the new normal? I think there's a lot coming our way, a lot of opportunity, but also I think there's going to be a bit of a struggle to start with in terms of grasping all the change that's coming. So, yeah.
Janet, would you like to come back on any of those points that Sammy has made there?
I think it will be normal. I think that's exactly what will become normal. People will be comparing carbon yields as well as food yields, but I don't think they'll be doing it instead. I think the most progressive farm businesses are doing this now. They think about production on their farm in a much broader sense than is traditional. So I've met farmers who have got 12 different enterprises operating from their farm. They call it enterprise stacking, and they've got all different businesses from the local community. There's no waste, nothing goes to waste. They've got the trees that they're using in agroforestry. They harvest the fruit and the nuts from those. They use the wood. They've got people making things out of the leftover wood. The rest of the wood is used for bio fuel. So that it's that sort of thinking that I think will have to take hold more broadly in the industry. And the reason for that is there's several reasons for that. One is because that's a better way to have a resilient business. Diversity is better than a monocrop, just for the purpose it makes you less vulnerable to shocks and economic shocks and weather shocks and all the other sorts of shocks. But also that's how to have a kind of profitable business in the future. I think you need a combination of environmental goods and food goods. So I think exactly what Sammy described, you'll all be down the pub. Weird as that sounds now, comparing carbon prices just like you compare fertilizer or wheat prices now.
Roddy, could you just touch briefly on, Sammy mentioned the food prices there and how they haven't particularly changed much. I saw a statistic the other day that inputs of agriculture, like the inflation has been about 22%, as opposed to the price of the retail price index for food was minus 0.7%. So I just wondered from your point of view what you're seeing. Obviously, you see a lot of farmers on the ground.
There is cost inflation that is, and we've seen output prices being strong virtually across the board. The one notable exception would be the pig sector, but we've seen gains to where they've been last year quite significantly, and even over the last 5 years. But margins run the risk of being squeezed. The inflationary pressures that or what's causing inflation is relatively narrowly confined. It's to energy and other fuel things. In the domestic circumstance, we're seeing a wee bit of inflation with games, toys and cars, particularly used cars, around the problem of getting new cars because of the problem of getting chips in from China. And I think we're going to see everything that's derived on energy continuing to be under pressure. I think we'll see energy prices continue to drive inflation through into maybe the middle of next year, late spring, something like that. Relatively little at the moment in food prices, but we may start to see some of that working through and affecting consumer prices. So we are there, but I'm speaking to other economists. Whether the inflation stays at that higher level for long, don't know. But because of that, the markets are expecting some pressure on interest rate hikes, and we could possibly see 3 or 4 hikes between now and the end of next year. But don't get gripped by that, because we're only talking of it going up to something approaching 1%. Which still historically is very low. If you look at what's happened to have base rates over the last almost 45 years, they've been around 6% on average, and it's only in the last 10 or so years, but they've been sub 1%. So those hikes, they're going to money costs a bit more, but I don't think that's going to be a big impact on the sector. So we're relatively relaxed about the impact of interest rates, and there are ways you can look to mitigate the unknowns of what's going to happen to interest rates by where it's appropriate by looking at fixed rates or taking fixes on some of your exposure.
Thanks, Roddy. So Andrew, you obviously meet quite a lot of fairly progressive farmers who are looking at this in quite different ways. So I just wondered, first of all, sort of what you're finding, sort of things that how they're thinking and taking on these new challenges, but also questions come in from Luke Cox, which is sort of on the back of that, that how does the Farmers Weekly and obviously similar organisations go about in sort of spreading the word to the slightly less progressive farmers and trying to sort of upskill the whole farming community in general and providing that information? So,
well, I think first of all, the number of farmers that want to be early adopters of things is quite low. And that's completely understandable because we take enough risks just sticking a seed in the ground or putting the ram back in with the ewes, let alone sort of trying to be the first to experiment in carbon trading or perhaps trying a totally new method of farming. So, the farmers that do take those risks, they deserve a lot of our gratitude, I think, and we need to, find ways to support them because we need to learn from them. And we need to, place people like, or agencies like the AHDBs to do a lot of knowledge sharing around what goes well and what doesn't on some of those more adventurous farms. And I think the strategic farms are great for that. And other farmers that, we have a good relationship with the magazine, very kindly talk to us regularly about how those things are going. But another key question sort of relating to carbon in particular that I think a lot of even the more progressive farmers are worrying is, this may well be an income stream if we can help offset some of what you might call the dirtier industries, their emissions, when they are looking to, buy up credits from tree planting or the like. But balanced against that is farming's own emission problem. And that has to be put into context. It's perhaps more moderate than certainly the global average, and it's more moderate than perhaps some campaigners would like to make out, but we are still net emitters. And we have to think about how ourselves as an industry can become carbon neutral, if that is an objective that the government and certainly food companies would like us to get to. To what extent do we need to look after and hold on to those carbon credits? Because obviously our businesses can't become net zero, but perhaps as a whole, we can offset emissions at a farm level by, planting trees in some corners to offset the diesel that has to be used or the emissions from maybe our cattle. So do we do that first and put our own house in order to say to perhaps Arla, look, I'm carbon neutral and you can now put that on a carton of milk? Or do we go to the house builder down the road and sell those carbon credits? And these are the really big questions that we need to sort of grapple with over the next few years and sort of figure out, alongside building sort of stable, reliable markets for these things and sort of educating everyone then to hopefully make it fair so that anyone that wants to pitch in can do it in a way that means that their fingers don't get burnt. And I think just a final point, with all these inflationary pressures and the pressures of losing subsidy, there is some really difficult times ahead for some farm businesses in particular. I've said a few times before, I think I'm not really that worried about the biggest farms or about the smallest farms, with those who have folk working off the farm already, or they have other businesses alongside their farming. It's Theresa May's old phrase of the squeezed middle is what worries me, the sort of family-sized farms where perhaps they're both involved full-time on the farm and that's their only income stream. And I think they are the ones who are going to feel the pinch the soonest, and they are the ones that, as a brand and as an industry, we should be most concerned about it with all the change to come.
Okay, and finally on the last bit about carbon quickly, although I'm sure it might pop up again. Roddy, just a quick question to you, which we had sent in just before the this debate. One of our committee members, Tom James, asked, how is NatWest looking to value farms potentially on carbon capture and also valuing them on dwindling other global resources such as water in the future? And will this impact borrowing allowance, or is it something that NatWest have started to consider, or is it still further into the future?
We don't value the farms. We get qualified chartered surveyors who work to the Chartered Surveyors Red Book guidance to produce valuations where they're required. So that will be how they decide to take forward the valuations of the other assets on the farm will be prescribed by that, and we will accept that methodology as we've done for it, how in recent times they value wind turbines on farms, etc. But yes, certain of these assets will improve the value of the farm. An example would be somebody who's in a drought area who has constructed a reservoir to capture winter rainfall and excess flow from a river, etc., will undoubtedly receive a higher valuation for that area of farmland than a neighbour down the road that does not have that capability to irrigate the crops. But the underlying point I think to make is that it's not the asset value that is key to our lending decisions. It can help, but it's actually the ability to pay the interest and, more importantly, repay the capital. And that's what's crucial to us. The asset value gives a comfort blanket that if we take a legal charge over that, if, and thankfully it seldom happens, that something goes drastically wrong in the business and it's not viable and can't continue and can't trade its way out of it, we have to look at other ways to get back the capital that we have lent that business. And that's where it comes in. The other thing that having tangible security that you can offer is that it can give you a pricing advantage because the risks are lower. Undoubtedly going forward as things develop, yes, these carbon, etc., may attract a value that can be attributed to farm. But at the moment, I see it being challenging because there is no one standard. It's all voluntary. There's different methodologies used. And in some of the schemes I've looked at, it's not long term in locking up the carbon. I saw one scheme that suggested that you will follow regenerative practices with minimum tillage, but if there's an agronomic need, you can come in and plough the field. And it was talking about soil carbon. So as soon as you do that, you started an oxidization process that releases it. We need to be sure that what is being done delivers permanence. And the other thing, just to touch a point you made earlier, that if a farm sells their carbon credits, they've lost that forever and a day potentially. And I think we have to establish and get our own house in order first and get using our own sequestration to help balance our own books before we look to start selling on for a perceived value to others and then leaving ourselves in a strange place when we find that we're not delivering on what we need to do.
Thanks, Rodney. Thank you very much. Okay, so now we're going to actually launch a poll, as I mentioned earlier. So the poll is, what is the effect of current policy change? So as you can see, you've got a number of options there. If you could please click your answers. We'll leave that up for the next 20 seconds or so. Hopefully they'll start coming through in a second. There we go. They're starting to show me what you're thinking now. And then at least...
Oh, this can't vote. That's outrageous.
I know. Absolutely, Andrew.
I was just trying to vote. Everything's just about right. Where's government's doing a great job on this list?
Okay, so still changing around, but it looks like it's pretty decided that it's too little detail is coming up as one of the answers. So I'll just quickly ask, anyone else got any more questions? Please keep them coming in. We've had some really good ones so far. And now I'll just go back to Janet quickly. It's come back. There's quite a few there that are just about right, but there's also quite a few have come back with too little detail. What are Defra sort of doing as far as trying to? There's been a bit of criticism in the past about not providing enough detail. What are Defra doing to try and address that?
So there's a few things to say about this. The first thing to say is we completely understand that farmers need detail in order to plan, and that you plan over multiple years. And so we absolutely get that. We are going to be we've published some information, I put it in the chat earlier, where we've shown what's the agriculture transition plan, and that's got some dates in it as to when things are going to happen, and some information about what the different things are that we're doing. And then we published an update in June with some more information in it. But what we haven't yet done is publish the kind of details of each scheme to say, this is exactly who's eligible. These are the terms on which you can come into this scheme. This is exactly what you can get paid for and how much. And the reason we haven't done that is yet, but we will start doing it very shortly, is that we're trying to take a test and learn approach. So just as you would on your farm, you don't on your farm sit there and say, here is every single thing I'm going to do on my farm for the next 7 years, come what may. You do things, see what you learn, see what the weather turns out to be like, and then you adjust and adapt your course. And we need to do this program like that. Otherwise, we'll fail. And that's what lots of government programs do, because there's a lot of pressure on you in a job like mine to say at the beginning, here is every single thing you're going to do, because you do get asked questions a lot about it. But my feeling is if we do that now, it will definitely be wrong. So we don't want to provide false certainty, because we're going to learn a lot over the next couple of years, but we do need to provide enough information for people to plan. And that's a tricky balance, and we won't always get it right. I think at the moment, it feels like there's a swelling of people saying, come on, we do need more details now, actually. And we have got a lot coming out over the next couple of months. So keep your eyes peeled, because before the end of this year, there will be details of the exit scheme for farmers, for those who want to leave the sector. We did a consultation about that earlier this year, and we'll have the details out for that by the end of the year. We'll be confirming the details for the Sustainable Farming Incentive early rollout next year. We'll be confirming that in November, like we said we would. And we'll also say what that scheme broadly is going to look like in 23 and 24. So what sort of things will it pay for? We're going to publish details of the local nature recovery scheme to say this is the sort of things that will pay for and how we think it's going to work. And we'll also be doing the competition for the first projects for the landscape recovery scheme. And then on the productivity side, we'll be launching the Farming Investment Fund and the Farming Equipment and Technology Fund, and having details there to say this is exactly what you can claim and exactly what we'll pay for, and they'll actually be open for applications. So there's a lot of detail coming out over the next couple of months, which I hope will really help with this issue. But the other thing to say about this is I think some of the time what's driving that question, what's behind that question isn't just I need the details of the scheme. There's two other questions that are sort of behind it. One is, how does this all fit together, and how is it going to work on my farm? Like, what is the whole, not just the things that Sarah and I are talking about tonight, but all the other things to do with supply chain fairness and the supply chain issues we were talking about earlier, and trade policy. How is this all going to fit together to affect my farm? And so colleagues in Defra are talking about how can we do a better job of showing how that all joins up together for people, so you can understand how it makes sense in your farm. And also, how am I going to make up my lost income from basic payments? And that's what's driving that question about details. And for that, I can give you as many details as you like about our schemes, but that will only partly answer the question, because we also need farmers to be thinking, as we were talking earlier, about how they're going to manage their business through this process, and what their business is going to look like in a world where they don't receive direct payments, and instead they need to generate income from other sources, including schemes. So for that, we're also investing in advice for farmers, free business planning advice. There are 19 organisations currently giving free advice to farmers to help them plan their way through the transition, which I think that is probably more important in a way than the scheme details that we're going to publish before the end of the year, because that's for each farmer to think, what are my options? What does my business look like? What do I need to do? And I think that's what's behind that question. Nonetheless, we will be publishing all those scheme details I mentioned before the end of the year, like we said we were going to, and then we'll see what people think about them, and we'll continue to publish details thereafter as well. But we won't give false certainty, because I don't think that's the right thing to do. and that's letting people down much worse than hanging fire until we've got something right, I think.
Thank you very much. Sammy, would you like to, first of all, sort of come back on anything you'd like to there on the back of what Janet's just said? And also, I think it'd be rude not to, well, we've got Defra and all these brilliant speakers here, not to touch on sort of the potential for a great new entrant scheme in the future. And just sort of if you fancy outlining what the sort of challenges you think are to future farmers out there, and sort of what a scheme might help with potentially.
Yeah, for sure. And I think Janet's hit the nail on the head in terms of business planning and getting that support to plan for the next couple of years, because that is what is going to, I think, make or break a business in terms of where are they going to be in terms of bridging the gap of losing some of their basic payment, and where are they going to find that bit of money. And is it going to be in something that is going to be released in the SFI, or is it going to be somewhere else in terms of natural capital, carbon, etc., all those other income streams that we've already discussed? And yeah, on the new entrant scheme, I'm sure it has been repeated multiple times in many of our agri meetings. And I think the first couple of things that always come up are support in terms of having people there to guide new entrants, and capital are the two most important things that these new entrants are going to need, as well as the opportunity. Finding those opportunities is going to be great if they're out there, and there's going to be a lot of people, I think, that are going to take them up, but they will need the capital support, and I'm sure Roddy will back me up on that in terms of having capital to set up a farming business. They're going to need quite a lot. So, yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Sammy. Janet, is there anything that, or Sarah potentially, is there anything you'd like to jump in there on what you're potentially looking at in terms of the new entrant scheme? I know it's just coming out of co-design phase.
Yeah, Sarah, why don't you answer that one?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, as you know, we've been doing a lot of co-design work, and I'd say that that's absolutely an approach we're going to continue to take. And building on what Sammy says, that co-design approach has really helped us understand the barriers that there are to coming into farming. And actually, I would say there are sort of three key barriers that people have talked to us about, and those are access to finance, access to land itself, and finding where you can take on those farming opportunities, and then access to training and skills. So both technical skills in terms of how do you grow wheat or keep a cow, and those kind of technical skills, alongside things about how do you build a successful business, how do you manage a business, how do you shape the market that you're working within. And so what we've been doing, working with new entrants, working with those that already support new entrants, and working with the farming organisations, is to try and identify what are some of the things, and what is the role that government might be able to take in helping overcome those barriers. Government's not going to be able to overcome all of those, and it's not good value for taxpayers' money to look to try and knock each of those barriers down in totality. But what we can do is hopefully provide a framework and support for new entrants that will help those businesses succeed and prosper. And I think Graham asked a question which I answered in the chat about that support being there to benefit those who could come in during the transition to build businesses that are going to support the environmental outcomes as well as food production. And that is exactly, I think, what the opportunity that the scheme holds. So those discussions are continuing. We'd really appreciate if anyone here wants to get involved and help us in the design of the scheme. Then please just pop your details in the chat, and we can include you in those sessions that we have. It's really exciting to think about how we can support people coming into the sector and what we can do about that. So there's a lot more to do, a lot more people to talk to, and a lot more learning. But the the co-design process that we've been undertaking to date has been hugely helpful, and I know a number of you have been involved. So I just wanted to record my thanks for the support you've given us to date.
Thanks, Sarah. And I'm sure we've got plenty of people on here who would love to get involved. Andrew, you obviously, through your time as a young farmer and now in your current role, must meet a lot of fairly inspirational young farmers who probably have sort of found ways to overcome those difficulties of access to finance, land, and also training. Any tips from your point of view from what you've sort of come across?
Well, I feel like I can only speak in generalities here, Tom, so perhaps I won't say too much for too long, as we have a farm advisor and a banker on the line. But certainly for me, having, as you say, been on a lot of farms with younger farmers, and also seeing the way that other more established businesses with older farmers support young people, I think for me that is almost more important. And I would just, if there's anyone on the call this evening who has a real ambition to farm and wants their own farming business, perhaps hasn't really thought why they want their own business, I would say just answer that question first of all and be absolutely sure that that's the route you want to take, because there are a lot of routes into farming now in different ways and a lot of different ways to work in our brilliant sector. And as we all know, getting into farming, particularly for those of you who don't have a background in farming, the barriers are enormous. And it's not the role of government, as Sarah said, to knock down all of them. And it is just an enormously challenging time. There will be some great opportunities that materialise in the future as the sort of impact of BPS changes and other stuff shake out that we can't even foresee yet. And I would just say, keep an open mind and just keep talking to people, keep talking to the best in the industry. There's a lot of people out there who are very willing to do some great mentoring, and just, if you're at a conference, go and try and speak to everyone. If you're at market, get introduced to the people who have the livestock you admire. There's a lot of people in our industry who are quite shy as well, and maybe won't volunteer their services. But it's a bit glib of me to say, because I'm a journalist and I like to network. But that's the thing I've found has helped me in my career an enormous amount, is just get to know people, and sometimes the opportunities will just materialise. But I'm very happy to bow to the business expertise of others on the call about setting up the business and the financial side of it.
Thank you, Andrew. Roddy, quickly back to you. We're running slightly close to time now, but just quickly on the capital side of it, I don't know if NatWest are looking into things for new entrants particularly. I know there's talk which is slightly different as it's more government-led, but with the British Business Bank. Anything you could mention with? Yeah.
We, like probably most of the other banks, will have criteria that we assess our lending against. We have a policy, and we, in inverted commas, we benchmark to that. But we are willing, for the right individual with the right case, to step outside those guidelines and provide. And we have done for younger farmers on some occasions. I'm not going to say it's a tap turned on and it's a floodgate, but in the right situation where there's lots of experience and they demonstrate a good understanding of what they're doing, what their business is about, we are willing to do that. One of the challenges is if they come to us and say we've got an FBT for 5 years and that's it, there has to be some prudence about the term that we can lend over, because the business could come to an end in 5 years' time. So that sometimes but we would try to find a way to work with them to work for them, because if it doesn't work for them, it will never work for us. The businesses being successful are what we need to make our business successful. So that's where we're starting from, and it's things like, what do we know about the customer? What's their track record? What experience they have? Do they understand and know about? Have they got the business skills? What's the capital going to be used for? How much they need, and have they really thought through how much they need, and they understand that? Can they evidence that it has the potential to service and repay? And then we get down to the unfortunate bits. What's our insurance if the business fails to perform? But we'll take views on that, and it's presenting the whole package. And if some areas are strong, it can counteract for areas that maybe don't come up to the level we need. But the overall package is one we feel that we can afford to take a chance on. As regards the business bank, I can tell you what I know. There was a scheme until COVID kicked in called the Enterprise Finance Guarantee Scheme that could give some money, but it was hamstrung in agriculture by state aid rules from Europe that limited the amount of state aid to €15,000 equivalent over a rolling 3-year period, which meant that the amount of support you could get there, provided there was a business that worked and you were lacking in security, you could go there. But when COVID came in, that stopped. And I say the amount you could get tapered off really significantly. You could probably get support for about £45,000 over a 10-year period because of those rules. And we've then seen the business bank step in over the last 18 months or so with bounce back loans, C-bills, and currently there is the recovery loan scheme that should come to the end of this year, but the mood music's kind of suggesting it might be rolled into next year. Going forward, there is a scheme there currently that Business Bank will give unsecured loans up to 25,000 through its partner company, the Startup Loans Company. And alongside the loan, you get access to mentoring, etc., for a 12-month period. I say it's fixed rate of about 6%, I think it is, and up to 5 year term. What they're doing going forward, I don't know. It will depend on where the UK government gets to about its subsidy control regime, but there may be something coming, but we've no visibility of just what their thinking is in the medium to longer term.
Thanks very much, Roddy. So starting to come towards the end of the session now, but I just wanted to sort of quickly touch on sort of the pace of change. We sort of mentioned it briefly with the polling, and just there was some sort of quite interesting but also slightly shocking results came out from the Rabbi survey last week, I believe, which showed that 36% of people who responded to it, farmers, were probably or possibly depressed. And just wanted to sort of put it out to the panellists. I'll go first to Janet. Just whether you think that there is obviously a lot of change, and you have the Farm Resilience Fund, which I'm sure hope to help with this, but it's just if it's too much change at one time, there's already a lot of different pressures on farmers with a huge amount of different amounts of compliance. For example, I've found out in the past couple of weeks with the new poultry enterprise that you've got 3 different assurance schemes or 3 different inspectors that you have to deal with, and that's the same in many other industries before you even get into the new schemes that are coming out. So it's just whether this huge amount of change could risk the well-being of our industry potentially dropping already further. Hopefully not, and hopefully we can end in a slight positive as well. But over to you, Janet.
Well, that would be an awful outcome, and it's definitely not the one that we're aiming for. It's awful that there's such a high level of depression and suicide among farmers. And I think some of the work that farmers do to try and make this something that people talk about is really important, like it is in life in general. I have a history of mental health problems, and I talk about it very openly at work and publicly because I want to make it normal that we talk about these things. And this is one of the ways we do that is by just talking about it. And so I personally feel very passionately about this because I don't want anyone to suffer unnecessarily, and I certainly don't want anyone to suffer on their own from mental illness. And there's a lot of stigma attached still. And I think it seems to me that there's more stigma in the farming sector than there is in others, and it's more difficult to talk about it than it is in other areas. I think, you know, even in my career in the civil service, it's become possible for me to talk about it publicly in a way I never would have done when I came into roles in the public sector in my 20s. And it feels to me like farming is where we were in the civil service like 20 years ago in terms of just coming out and just people starting to talk about it. So anything I can personally do to encourage people to talk about it, then I will. As you mentioned, the resilience programme is intended to help farmers get control of the situation and understand what are the changes that are coming and how are they going to affect me and what are my options. And I think that's a big part of the path through this for people. I think what's really difficult for people is if they're looking at a bewildering array of changes and they just don't know where to start. But then I do think lots of farmers that I talk to say to me, they just feel like they've got it coming at them from all angles. They feel like they've got government coming at them for regulation. They've got the people buying from them coming at them. They've got their assurance schemes, as you say, and they've got people in the public vilifying them for whatever particular thing it is that they're being vilified for. And they feel really, really misunderstood. And I can see why, because actually when you go and stand on a farm with a farmer, it's quite a moving experience. It is for me anyway, to see the level of commitment and passion to the work that you're doing and to doing it well and to, good husbandry and taking care of the environment. And I think the public just don't see that. And I'm not from the farming sector and I didn't see it before I was in this role. And I think there's much more we can all do together to present a much more positive image of farming and the contribution that it can make to the rural economy, to communities, to the environment, to climate. And I think that a lot of the work that we're doing actually to remove subsidies and instead invest that money in outcomes that we know the public really want to see, I think that can make a good contribution to that. And I think there's a direct link between how farming is perceived and how people in the sector feel themselves and their vulnerability to mental health. And so I hope that the work we're doing, taken all together, will help present farming in a more positive light. It will help people understand what the options are that are available to them and for them to engage meaningfully in the biggest challenges of our time. Farmers are at the forefront of climate change. They're feeling the effects before anybody else, and they're the ones that can do a lot about it on their land and the biodiversity crisis. So there's a lot to be positive about, but I feel an affinity to those in the sector that are suffering in that way, having suffered myself from depression and anxiety, and I take it very seriously and feel it very deeply and really want to be a positive force for helping make a difference on that front.
Thank you, Janet. Very well said. I think one thing I think is it's extremely important as well, which I'm really glad that Defra is sort of addressing, is the regulation side. And hopefully from that will help, rather than people sort of constantly looking over their shoulders. If they haven't dotted an I or crossed a T, they're going to get the book thrown at them.
Yeah.
So hopefully that will help as well. Sammy, would you like to touch on that point still?
Yeah, and if I may, I'm going to try and turn it around positively, because I think the fact that there is change, people are asking a lot of questions and people are talking more, not necessarily about mental health or going down that route, but the fact that people are talking and asking questions, networking more, means that farmers are getting out more and talking more, which is what they need to do. So I do think that this whole change could bring a positive outlook in terms of mental health, and going forwards, we can all be better at talking about things, talking about change, because farmers hate change. And that's why they're all getting their nicks in a twist. But equally, they're talking more about it, which is surely making it better.
Definitely. It's talking about it, because change is scary at the end of the day, isn't it? Unfortunately. Roddy, quick final point from you, and then we'll go on to Andrew, and we'll have a bit of a round.
I think there's an onus on us all to look out for our friends, neighbours, family, and not to be put off. In inverted commas, drag them out. I think it's important, no matter what business or industry in, is that you make time for yourself and you step back and away from whatever your coal face is. I think we should encourage everyone to build time into their day, their week, to do other things, to get off farm, get involved in something else. And I'm slightly hesitant to say it in this forum. I think it's good to get a wider circle than just other farmers. It gives you a totally different perspective. Young farmers has absolutely got a place, but I think it should be wider. I have a wide range of friends, from farmers, lawyers, accountants, dentists, doctors, firemen, and conversation round the supper table when we're out. Nobody wants to know what the doctor does. We all think we know. We all know what a dentist does. Lawyers and accountants are just bloody boring. But everyone wants to know what's going on in the farm. And I say there's an opportunity there for us to tell our story and get better recognition and better support.
Thank you, Roddy. Final point from you, Andrew.
Well, I have two very quick points. I think I would absolutely back up what Roddy said there, and we've seen that through our Britain's Fittest Farmer competition. It's a bit of fun, but it's a way of talking about physical and mental health and the link between the two. And the conversations I've had when I was at the event last year, I missed it this year, but last year, so many farmers were saying to me, this was their escape. It was their time. It was when they went down the gym, they saw people from all around the village, and they just, whatever problems, they left those at the farm gate when they went down there, and it was just their time to get away. And that's brilliant. And we need to do more of that. And I'm very grateful too that I have a circle from university and other places of people in and out of farming. And the second thing, I would just make a direct appeal to everyone on the call. We're launching our Dying to Feed You campaign, which is all about another push to improve farm safety this week. And everyone has a responsibility to call out avoidable incidents and bad practice when they see it. And we've all seen TikTok videos and that sort of thing. It's not my job to hector people and tell them what to do, but I just want to join those other voices in farming to say we can do better and bring down the accident rate on farm. And we know the aftermath of so many of those accidents, even when there isn't a fatality, is poor mental health, it's physical and mental pain. And I'm sorry I wanted to end on a positive, not a negative, but I just think this is so important. And we need young farmers, and we need everybody to contribute to this. And I look forward to having many more conversations about this alongside the rest of the team over the next 12 months.
Thank you very much, Andrew. It's another really, really valuable point and a huge challenge as an industry as a whole, I'd say. So thank you very much to all of our panellists this evening. I think we've had a really fascinating discussion, covered numerous things. One thing just early on, I noticed all the panellists picked up on in their opening sort of gambits is how we can farm with the environment and the profit. That it's not one or the other. It seems like a lot of people out there, whether they're environmentalists or they're farmers, that seem to think that sometimes it's one or the other. But I'm absolutely passionate that you can do both, that you can have a win-win. We touched briefly on food prices and the inflation and whether they might need to go up slightly, but we could have been there all day and moved swiftly onto the carbon, which we had a really interesting discussion. New entrants, a really interesting topic there. And I think there's some really fascinating insight from Janet and Roddy on the banking front. And then some really inspirational sort of words from Andrew. And then finally, a really, really important subject, which is really close to my heart, of well-being. Janet mentioned how the civil service got way better at talking. And I agree with you that farming definitely isn't good enough. But what I would say is I feel that young farmers as a whole has completely changed in the past sort of 5 years. And I really feel like young farmers are really leading the industry. forward in terms of talking about mental health. And I'm really passionate about that, and really hope that it continues and we can change the industry as a whole. So it's not a, we do talk about it, but it's not a big deal. And so, I hope that's a positive that we can end on. That, hopefully young farmers will be driving the industry forward in terms of well-being and everything else. So I thank all of our panellists, and I thank everybody who's listened this evening, and have a good evening. Thank you.